The better the foundation, the stronger the building, and in this case, the stronger the body. This video will show you 3 things to enhance your foundation and up your game. Stick around. Hey guys, Fit by Fenton here, and welcome to my channel where I help you better understand your body through the lens of sports medicine. I'm a certified personal trainer and I specialize in rehab exercise, and over the last 6 years of my practice, along with 12 years of my personal fitness journey, I've kind of realized that fitness and rehab exercises, they always thread back to 3 fundamental movements. And these 3 movements will completely change the way that you understand and move your body. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and ringing that bell so that you can stay up to date with all the tips and tricks that I have up my sleeve that I've learned over the years. Practically all the clients that first come to see me already have pre-existing conditions and injuries. A good chunk of them has had them for years and have seen lots of people, but the common denominator still remains that they lack the understanding and the control of these 3 fundamental movements. Whether they work long hours at an office desk and they develop poor posture and they have aches and pains all the way down their back, or they develop overuse injuries from working out. Regardless, everyone who signs on with me needs to begin here. This is my ground zero, and let's get started. The transversus abdominis, also referred to as the transverse, is a deep core muscle located beneath the rectus abdominis, which is the six-pack. You can think of it as a sheet of muscle that wraps around the waist like a corset. Let's start off lying on our back with our knees bent and feet flat on the floor. Our first goal is to simply inhale through the nose to breathe into the stomach and allow it to expand. As we exhale through the mouth, we should feel the stomach sink back down. This is your transverse working. What we want to do is to take what the body naturally does and hone it with control. However, be very mindful that you're relaxed and not forcing the expansion or subtle engagement. I always tell my clients to have intention without the tension. As you become more comfortable with this, try to prolong each breath. Challenge yourself and see how long you can stretch it out. The better your breath control, the better your performance. For better feedback, let's palpate the transverse. Find your front hip bones with your first 2 fingers and move them down diagonally about an inch or 2. Inhale into the fingers to feel the stomach expand, and exhale to draw your core inwards and away from your fingertips. You can imagine yourself shrink wrapping your spine or putting on your favorite pair of pants that's now a bit too tight. You'll know you're doing it right when the engagement only draws inwards. Having the control to isolate this movement is going to be extremely challenging at first, so remember to stay relaxed and try not to create tension elsewhere. When we're in deep concentration, common areas of collected tension can include our face, jaws, neck, and shoulders. Sometimes when we try too hard or we put too much energy into things, a couple things can happen. And as you can see here, there's a lot of abrupt jolting occurring within the core. It's not very smooth, a lot of popping. That's not good. Now, another thing that could happen is you can start off nicely, everything's drawing in, and near the end, maybe perhaps you run out of breath. You're forcing that engagement. And so what happens is as you're forcing it through at the very end, just to complete that maybe in your head like that 20%, you're pushing it back up. And another thing that can occur is when we engage it, but there's no change. It doesn't actually sink down. And then lastly, it's the excessive pop. So it not only does it not even draw in, it's actually now popping outwards. So ideally, we want to be able to feel everything draw in and down in a nice controlled way. And it's always good to change it up into different positions. Now we're engaging against gravity here, pulling the navel and the core up and into the spine. The main thing is to make sure that this is a muscular engagement and not a skeletal change in the lumbar. For the pelvic tilting, you want to first locate your tailbone along with the top of your sacrum. With your hands, you want to create a diamond formation and place that underneath your pelvis so that the top of the sacrum is on your thumbs and your tailbone is on your index fingers. Now imagine your pelvis as a bowl of water that's completely filled to the brim. If I were to get you to pour the water towards your feet, you should feel the tailbone start grounding into your index fingers. If you were to pour the water back towards your face, the top of the sacrum now becomes heavier on your thumbs. As you pour the water back towards your feet, that's your anterior pelvic tilting. You're pouring the water in front of you. And as you pour the water back behind, that is your posterior pelvic tilt. One thing to really be mindful of when we're doing these pelvic tilts, especially with the posterior pelvic tilt, is that we don't end up using our legs to push into the ground to really force that posterior tilt here. You really want to just think about rolling the pelvis and keeping it on the ground so that it doesn't lift off of your hands. Another way of manipulating this movement would be by way of the sit bones. So if you were to be sitting on your hands, you'd feel these two bones underneath your bum. Those guys are it. So here I've got them wrapped around, and as I come into a posterior pelvic tilt, I should feel the sit bones kind of draw in together. And as I come into an anterior pelvic tilt, the sit bones widen apart. The main thing is that I should never feel like I'm actually doing the pelvic tilting with my lower back. It should never be from the spine. It's always from either the sit bones or the pelvis itself. And again, here we're switching up the position just to challenge the brain a bit. We're coming into a posterior pelvic tilt, tucking the tailbone under, and then widening my sit bones to come into that anterior pelvic tilt. Now, don't get this confused with the cat-cow, where you actually round the spine all the way up towards the ceiling. This is actually more about the pelvis tilting back and forth than it is about the spine. And then coming into standing, we have the anterior pelvic tilt, widening the sit bones, and then posterior pelvic tilt, tucking the tailbone under, right? And you'll notice it's just the pelvis moving, and I'm not actually using my back to be swaying back and forth, which is also a common mistake. So when it comes to shoulder stability, I like to break it down into two different movements. The first one being the head of the arm just plugging back into the socket. Nice and easy, nothing too crazy. You don't want to be pulling too far back because then you start getting all that lat work, and nor do you want to be hiking the shoulder up towards the ear. It's just an easy drawing back into the socket, nice and gentle, without overworking the lats. And again, we'll see the lat over engagement here again as we try too hard. So sometimes when we lack the isolation happening within the shoulders, we end up bending our elbows. We end up using our biceps here to kind of think of pulling backwards. What we really want to do is keep the arm straight and think of the work just solely happening within the shoulder joint. And the second part's about the scapular engagement. So the scapula, being your shoulder blades, you want to imagine between the two shoulder blades we have a marble or a pencil, and you're just gently going to squeeze onto the object. What I don't want is for you to actually now use your shoulders to completely throw them back and overly engage. It's more of a subtle engagement in between the shoulder blades. And then once we understand both of those separately, we can bring them together where we think about the head of the arm plugs into the shoulder socket, and we're also working the shoulder blade engagement back into center towards the spine. Challenging the brain to be in different positions. Here I'm lying on the floor, really finding my scapular engagement here, mimicking an exercise as if I were going to be on a bench. Here I'm on all fours, really finding the scapular engagement. Again, this would kind of mimic me either in a plank or a push-up. And quite often when we're in this position, we get confused of what the scapular engagement should look like. So what happens is that we end up thinking of sinking the spine down and pulling the shoulder heads back, rather than actually engaging through the shoulder blades and creating more space between shoulder and ear. So I personally can't think of any exercises where these three movements are not important and are not in play. So if I think about my squat here, the shoulder blade engagement here keeps my shoulders aligned. My core engagement gives me the support that I need. And then a big major thing is, keeping my spine in neutral, and that's really controlled by how my pelvis is sitting, right? Whether I'm in too much of an anterior or posterior pelvic tilt. And here with the static lunge, I can engage my shoulder blades, and that will prevent the shoulders from rolling forwards, right? I can engage my core here to stay supported through the midsection, and that anterior and posterior pelvic tilt to really try to find the neutral. And with the push-ups, I have the scapular engagement there, kind of preventing my shoulders from rounding forwards and hollowing out the chest. My core is really engaged and drawing up to support the midsection, and that pelvic tilting again, just controlling the neutral spine to make sure that I don't come into a hyperlordosis. That's all for today, guys. I hope you found this video helpful. If you can already think of all the different ways that you can start implementing these 3 exercises, please leave a comment below to let me know. I'd love to hear your stories. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks.